Good day, Frank Casale here. I head up the Outsourcing Institute as well as the recently formed Institute for Robotic Process Automation. I'm joined here once again by one of our favorite experts in the field, Tom Young. Tom is an executive board member both of the Outsourcing Institute and of OPRA. Tom, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Frank.
So Tom, hopefully you saw a piece I wrote recently, short kind of a blog piece, and it was entitled Brace for Impact. In that piece, my objective was to alert the service provider community, outsourcing service provider community primarily, as to this trend and this potential threat that is robotic process automation. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that, okay, kind of continue on that Brace for Impact theme, and for those service providers that will see this. So let's talk about, if there was a headline, what is the headline from your perspective as to kind of that alert, that warning to the service provider community? Why should they be concerned?
Well, they should be concerned for a lot of reasons. I would say the last 2 years, most of them have woken up at some level. Whether they've come to a complete epiphany as to why this is a big deal varies firm to firm. When you look at the buying community, I'd say it's 9 out of 10 or more are still not fully grasping what's going on here. So why are the service providers, why should they be concerned? Well, for one is we are looking at a transformative way of provisioning services, moving from the physical to the virtual. So we've seen that happen with networks in the 80s and 90s with SDN and VPN replacing private networks. We saw it with cloud computing in the last 5 to 6 years, and it's accelerating now with the wars between, price wars between Microsoft, Amazon, and Google for cloud computing. And that has virtualized the compute. What we're seeing now is the virtualization of labor, so digital labor. And what this does is it lowers the price point. So I use this term called the zero concept. So think of a future world where the cost, the cycle times, and the defect rates in service delivery trend to zero. They won't get exactly to zero, but they'll look a lot more like zero than they do today. And so that affects people's business models. So if you're the top player in the industry like IBM, and you're sitting on $37 billion of annual revenue, that revenue is going to come down. Eventually, that'll be offset by some growth opportunities, but I don't believe in the short to medium term, that most service providers will be able to keep up with the erosion in their core business. Now, if you're a new player, this is all good news.
So Tom, let me stop you there. So is it fair to say that that if you think about the basic pricing model that this business is built on, and the business model is that this is built on, will be dramatically impacted, right? So pricing is going to be changing as we shift from people to software, and the whole premise of labor arbitrage becomes leapfrogged as a result of a robotic process automation. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. Labor arbitrage is near the end of its life cycle in terms of how far we're going to take it. We're getting there's political backlash in terms of the offshoring of jobs, but most of what we'll call the low-hanging fruit in the industry, especially in Europe and in the Americas, we've taken it to its natural conclusion where it just doesn't make any sense, and there becomes a diminishing return for continuing to do it. Now the growth rates are still there for the Indians, but I would tell you there isn't a CEO in an Indian firm, and I've talked to most of them, who don't recognize this as an existential threat to their core business. And what is the existential threat? They have made their business model selling low-cost bodies in the European and North American market. Now, obviously, they have other things that go along with that, but at the core, that's what they're offering. As that goes away with the displacement of the virtualization of that labor, digital labor, software is going to replace that, and it's going to level the playing field and create a new set of criteria for evaluating business solutions. So I think ultimately, and I read some of McKinsey's research, I think ultimately we'll find ourselves looking at markets that are much bigger than what we're going to lose here. But I think in the short term, the market is going to contract on a revenue basis as we innovate a disruptive new way of doing things.
So, I attempted recently, Tom, to sketch this out, and the sketch looked like something like this from left to right. So it's recent advancements in process automation are creating plummeting price points, which is creating just a lot of chaos and disruption for the service provider community. So that basically means maybe by as soon as this time next year, what many of the buyers are buying and what they're willing to pay for is different than most of the service providers may be willing to address, right? So if you're going in there with the old handbook, the old playbook, and you're talking people and traditional pricing, you're pretty much unlikely to win that deal. Is it fair to say that at least one or two or three competitors are going to be going in there with RPA-centric solution and RPA-centric pricing, which could be 25, 30, 50% cheaper?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I just was talking to one service provider about inserting these technologies, and they were dragging their feet a little bit, and then they just called up and said, "Oh, we're on a bid right now, and the technology is being used against us." And I say, "Well, too late. I mean, you're not going to, in the 11th hour insert that. You're going to have to figure that out on the next round." So, and here's the thing. I've talked to the service providers who use the old playbook. They lose a competitive deal to somebody who's got the new game. And the price that's awarded is below the cost case of the person. So they're looking at saying, they may have bid 40, their cost was 30, and the award was at 18. And if they're sitting there saying, how is it possible that for me to win another thing unless I can find a client who just doesn't know any better?
So Tom, what you and I know, just based on a lot of our joint efforts with regard to the Institute for Robotic Process Automation, the majority of the service providers that you and I have spoken to have pretty much been in reactive mode, right? So regardless of what we say or what someone else says or what they publish, it hits home when somebody has a deal on their desk and they suddenly see the reality, right? And they're scurrying. So from my experience in my recent meetings, the majority of these efforts have been triggered by that kind of a trigger event. So let's say there's a service provider that's watching this discussion that you and I are having, and they want to be proactive and they want to be preemptive. What is your advice to them as to what should they be doing right now before they get broadsided by that next gen deal, the first one that creates that wake-up call?
Yeah, I mean, using the terms proactive versus reactive is really at the core of it. I mean, you can fight this today, tomorrow, next month, etc. But you'll have to come to terms with the fact that this is going to happen. And so I would rather embrace it and lead the change than have the change done to me. So look, no account team wants to take their revenue down by 30%. They're comped on maintaining it and growing it. Public firms that are publicly traded in the stock markets require growth as part of their DNA. And this is a contraction event. Now, I think it's important for them to then manage that well and then articulate growth strategies. But I don't believe that you can grow your way out of this short-term drop that's going to happen. So if I look at like IT global infrastructure services, let's just say it's roughly $75 billion. If I were to reprice that using the cutting-edge technologies that are out there today, and I'm not talking about stuff that's in the lab, I'm talking about taking the best deals and applying it to that base, the number would be below $50 billion. So that means the market is inflated by a third. And so I don't believe analysts have come to terms with this. I don't believe that service providers have fully come to terms with the implications. They know it's happening, so they're on this, looking at it. But going down from 75 to 50 on its way to 25 and 20 is that's a sobering event, right? And so it's important for you to articulate then where are they going to then grow and deal with that with their shareholders. And again, do it proactively, because if you start losing business quickly, it's going to be hard to catch up.
Super. And if I would add to that, Tom, I think you'd agree, at minimum, be informed and be educated on what this is, who's doing it, how it works, and what impact it's going to have. Would you agree?
So one of the lines that I use with people is, no matter how much experience you have, and a lot of your sentences in question marks, not periods. And that means you really have to approach your work life, the way you think about the business, the way you solve problems, the way you approach your clients, the way you approach your peers, and be open to the possibility that things are different. So experience is good because it informed and grounds you, but if it blocks you from the new, then you'll be run over by the steamroller that's coming. To me, it's human nature to resist the change, right? If I'm doing well and I'm vested in the status quo, I'm less likely to lead to be the leader of that change. It's almost human nature to wait for something to be forced to react to it. I just would encourage people not to do that. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. The book, The Innovator's Dilemma, that was written 15 years ago, probably is more relevant today than it was when it was published. And in that book, it talks in great detail about that human nature and the way people operate and how they don't deal well with these disruptive technologies and disruptive innovations that happen in an industry like we're having today.
All right, Tom, as always, I appreciate your insight and expertise. We're out of time, but thanks again. I appreciate it. We'll do more of these when and where you're available. Again, to those of you who are viewing this discussion, if you'd like more information on robotic process automation, and as well as an additional video or two, or I think we even have an audio of you, Tom, over at www.erpanetwork.com. By the way, do I have to say I don't even think I have to say that part anymore. So erpanetwork.com, and if you'd like information on ITO and BPO best practices, go-to place for outsourcing on the internet, outsourcing.com. Tom, thanks again. I'll see you soon.
You bet, Frank. Thank you.